The air smelled of ash and despair. Smoke coiled through the skeletal remains of what had once been Earth's proudest city, now reduced to rubble and flickering embers. Commander Roy Everett crouched beside the crumbled remnants of a monument, his gray-blue eyes scanning the horizon for movement. His rifle hung loosely at his side, its power cells nearly drained, like the man holding it. They'd lost another city, another hope. "Commander," a voice crackled over his comms. It was Connor Maddox, his best pilot, and the only man still daring enough to make a joke when everything was falling apart. "Scouts report alien patrols moving north. They'll be here in an hour if we don't move." Roy sighed, running a hand through his dirt-streaked brown hair. "We stay put. They won't expect us to linger in a dead zone." "Maddox, get me keen." Connor's voice grew serious. "On it. But Roy, don't expect miracles." Miracles were in short supply these days. Humanity had clung to survival by the barest of threads, every victory erased by the overwhelming force of Zareth Vale's armies. The alien king had crushed them at every turn, his bioengineered soldiers and insidious tactics spreading fear across the galaxy. The Galactic Council, Earth's supposed allies, offered only platitudes and political maneuvering. They watched from their crystal towers while humanity burned. Roy leaned back against the monument, exhaustion tugging at him. His comm crackled again, this time with a familiar rasp. "Everett, this is Keen. I trust you're ready to listen." Agent Elias Keen was a ghost, a man whispered about in the darkest corners of the Resistance. No one knew his real allegiance, only that his information often came at a high price. "Talk fast," Roy said. "There's a way to turn this war around, but it's going to take more than guts. You'll need ruthlessness." Roy's jaw tightened. "We're fresh out of that, too. Get to the point." Keen's voice grew sharper. "The alien king is not untouchable. I know where he'll be, and I know how you can get to him. But you won't like the cost." Before Roy could respond, Connor's voice cut in. "Commander, satellite feed just came online. You're going to want to see this." Roy followed the signal to his wrist monitor, the small screen lighting up with grainy footage from the skies above Zareth Vale's fortress. A massive gathering was taking place, the alien king standing at the center of a pulsating, otherworldly crowd. His kingdom, a sprawling city of alien spires and glowing energy conduits, seemed alive, throbbing in rhythm with the cheers of his followers. "What am I looking at, Keen?" Roy demanded. "A coronation," Keen replied, his tone cold. "The king is consolidating power, rallying his forces for the final push. He'll be untouchable after this." Connor's voice carried a note of defiance. "So, what? We hit him now. Blow the whole place to hell." "No," Keen said. "You take him alive. Drag him out for the galaxy to see. You don't need to kill Zareth Vale. You need to humiliate him, break his image, and the Galactic Council will have no choice but to act. His empire will crumble." Roy felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The idea was insane, impossible. Yet, as he watched the footage, a seed of hope took root. A captured king, paraded before the council, might finally force their hand. "And how do we do that?" Roy asked. Keen hesitated. "There's a weak point in his kingdom's defenses, a passage rarely used. It's risky, but it'll get you inside. From there, it's up to you. Why are you giving me this?" Roy demanded, suspicion flaring. "What's in it for you?" Keen's chuckle was humorless. "Let's just say I have a score to settle. The king's downfall serves us both." The line went dead. Roy turned to see Connor and Chris Cole approaching. Chris, the team strategist, carried the weight of too many battles in his eyes. He studied Roy carefully, always the first to see the cracks beneath the surface. "Well," Chris asked. "We're going after the king," Roy said. Connor let out a low whistle. "Now there's a suicide mission if I've ever heard one." "I'm in." Chris frowned. "You're sure about this, Roy?" "It's a long shot, and Keen's not exactly trustworthy." I'm not sure about anything, Roy admitted. But what choice do we have? If we sit here, we lose. If we do this, we might buy ourselves a fighting chance. The three men fell silent, the enormity of the task ahead settling over them. Finally, Connor broke the tension with a grin. Guess I'd better dust off the Valkyrie. She's been itching for action. Chris smirked faintly. Just try not to crash it this time. Roy allowed himself a small, fleeting smile. They were walking into the lion's den, but they would do it together. As the team prepared for the mission, a shadow loomed over them, both figuratively and literally. Admiral Victor Hale, Earth's representative to the Galactic Council, strode into the makeshift base. His crisp uniform and polished demeanor stood in stark contrast to the chaos around him. "Everett," Victor said, his voice as smooth as oil, "I hear you're planning an unauthorized mission." Roy met Victor's gaze, his expression hard. "Who told you that?" "I have my sources," Victor said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Let me be clear. Any move against Zareth Vale without council approval is treason. Stand down or face the consequences." Roy stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "The council doesn't care about Earth. We're fighting for survival while they play politics. If you're not here to help, stay out of my way." Victor's smirk vanished, replaced by a steely glare. "This isn't over, Everett." As Victor stormed out, Roy turned to his team. "Double-check your gear. We leave at dawn." The sun rose, casting a fiery glow over the ruins as the team boarded the Valkyrie. Roy stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the horizon. There was no turning back now. They would capture the alien king or die trying. The engines roared to life, and the ship lifted off, cutting through the smoke and ash. Roy's thoughts were heavy, but his resolve was unshakable. The war wasn't over yet. Not if humanity had anything to say about it. The Valkyrie glided through the blackness of space, its engines whispering as the stealth systems cloaked the ship in near total invisibility. Inside, the team sat in tense silence, each man absorbed in his own thoughts. The glow of monitors painted their faces in ghostly light, and the only sound was the soft hum of the ship's machinery. Roy Everett stood near the cockpit, his hand gripping the back of Connor Maddox's chair. "Approaching the perimeter," Connor said, his tone devoid of its usual levity. His fingers danced over the controls, guiding the ship with a precision born of countless combat runs. Roy nodded, his voice calm but firm. "Chris, status?" Chris Cole, seated at a tactical station, studied the holographic display of the alien king's kingdom. The fortress loomed ahead, a sprawling monstrosity of alien architecture, its spires glowing with an unnatural bioluminescence. Defensive drones hovered in synchronized patrols, and energy fields shimmered in layers of protection. "Scans confirm the passage Keen mentioned," Chris said. "It's narrow and heavily shielded, but it's our best shot. The defenses there are minimal compared to the main gates. If we time it right, we can slip through, and if we time it wrong," Connor asked, smirking faintly, "we won't have to worry about what comes next," Chris replied without missing a beat. Roy straightened, his voice cutting through the tension. "We're not here to second-guess. We've made it this far. Let's keep it that way. Maddox, take us in." The ship descended into the alien atmosphere, skimming low over jagged, obsidian-like terrain. Strange, spindly structures jutted from the ground, glowing faintly with the same eerie energy as the fortress. The air seemed alive, thick with a static charge that set every nerve on edge. "Stay sharp," Roy said, his hand instinctively resting on his sidearm. Connor maneuvered the Valkyrie toward the passage, a narrow canyon carved into the alien rock. As they approached, a pair of sentry drones appeared on the sensors, their scanning beams sweeping the area. "Drones," Connor muttered. "They're not supposed to be this far out." "Keen didn't mention them," Chris said, his tone tight. "Keen doesn't mention a lot of things," Roy said grimly. "Chris, jam their sensors." Connor, hugged the canyon wall. The ship dipped lower, its sleek form weaving through the jagged canyon as Chris deployed countermeasures. The drones hesitated, their beams flickering as they struggled to process the interference. "We're clear for now," Chris said, exhaling slowly. Connor's voice carried a hint of relief. "And here I thought I'd miss the welcoming committee." As the ship reached the end of the passage, the fortress loomed ahead, an imposing structure of alien grandeur. Its central spire pierced the sky, pulsating with rhythmic energy that seemed almost alive. Roy's stomach tightened at the sight. "We're in," Connor said, setting the Valkyrie down on a flat outcropping just outside the fortress's sensor range. Time to do the impossible. The team disembarked, moving swiftly across the alien landscape. The ground beneath their boots felt strange, almost organic, and the air carried an unnatural hum that made the hairs on the back of Roy's neck stand up. Chris led the way, his scanner mapping the area as they approached an auxiliary entrance. The door was sealed with an intricate locking mechanism, its alien design pulsing faintly. "This is it," Chris said, crouching beside the control panel. "Give me a minute." Roy kept his rifle at the ready, his eyes scanning the shadows. Every nerve screamed that they were being watched, though the scanner showed no movement. Connor stood nearby, his usual bravado replaced by a quiet tension. "You think Zaratha's got a throne room in there, or does he just float around looking menacing?" Roy's lips twitched in a faint smile. "We'll find out soon enough." Chris's voice broke in. "Got it. Doors open." The team moved inside, the corridor beyond bathed in an unsettling green light. The walls seemed to pulse faintly, as if the fortress itself was alive. Roy motioned for silence, leading the group deeper into the alien stronghold. Every step felt like a descent into another world. The air grew thicker, heavier, and strange sounds echoed faintly in the distance. A rhythmic thrum vibrated through the floor, like the heartbeat of a giant. They encountered their first resistance near a junction. A pair of alien guards, their elongated forms covered in chitinous armor. Roy signaled for Chris and Connor to flank them while he took aim. The guards moved with unnerving precision, their weapons humming with energy. Roy fired first, his shot striking one guard in the chest. The creature screeched, collapsing as Connor and Chris dispatched the second. "Not so tough," Connor muttered, reloading his weapon. "Don't get cocky," Roy said. "That was a patrol. They'll know we're here soon." The team pressed on, navigating the labyrinthine corridors. They encountered more resistance. Elite guards armed with advanced weaponry, their movements unnervingly fast. Each skirmish left the team more drained, their ammunition dwindling. By the time they reached the inner sanctum, the tension was suffocating. The corridor ahead was lined with towering statues of Zarath, each one more imposing than the last. "This is it," Chris said, his voice barely above a whisper. Roy nodded, his grip tightening on his rifle. "Connor, stay back and cover our exit. Chris, with me." As they stepped into the sanctum, they found themselves face to face with Agent Elias Keene. He stood in the center of the chamber, flanked by two alien guards, his expression unreadable. "Keene," Roy said, his voice cold. "What are you doing here?" Keene smiled faintly. "Keeping my end of the bargain. Zarath knows you're here, Commander, and he's been waiting." Before Roy could react, a force field activated, separating him and Chris from the exit. The guards raised their weapons and Keene's smile widened. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" Keene said. Roy's mind raced, but his voice remained steady. "You're making a mistake. Zarath doesn't reward loyalty. He devours it." Keene's expression faltered for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Roy seized the moment, firing a shot that disrupted the force field. Chris moved quickly, taking out one of the guards while Roy neutralized the other. Keene backed away, his composure slipping. "You won't make it out of here alive." Roy's eyes burned with determination. "We'll see about that." As alarms blared throughout the fortress, Roy and Chris regrouped with Connor, who was already laying down covering fire. The team fought their way back to the Valkyrie, the corridors alive with chaos. By the time they reached the ship, the fortress was on high alert, drones swarming the air. Connor took the pilot seat, his hands moving with frantic precision. "Hold on," he shouted as the ship lifted off, dodging a barrage of energy blasts. Roy leaned against the bulkhead, his chest heaving. The mission had gone sideways, but they were still alive. For now, that was enough. The halls of Zareth Vale's fortress trembled with the chaos of combat as Roy Everett and his team pressed deeper into the heart of the stronghold. Smoke choked the air, mingling with the acrid scent of alien technology burning under the heat of battle. The rhythmic pulse of alarms echoed like a war drum, and every step felt heavier under the oppressive glow of the fortress's living walls. "Left flank clear," Chris Cole called out, his voice sharp and clipped. He was scanning ahead with his tactical visor, his movements precise despite the tension. "Don't get comfortable," Roy said, his rifle held ready. "The King's throne room is close. That's where this gets messy." Connor Maddox chuckled as he brought up the rear, his tone laced with forced bravado. "Messy? Roy, this whole mission's been a damn disaster. What's a little more chaos?" Roy shot him a grim look, but said nothing. Connor's humor was his way of coping, but they all knew the truth. This mission wasn't about survival anymore. It was about delivering a message, even if it meant none of them would live to see the outcome. The team approached the final barrier, a massive set of alien doors adorned with intricate carvings of Zareth Vale's conquests. The doors pulsed faintly, alive with the fortress's strange energy. Roy gestured for Chris to handle it. "Give me a minute," Chris said, setting to work with his tools. The mechanism was unlike anything they'd encountered, its design more organic than mechanical. Connor leaned against the wall, wiping sweat from his brow. "I don't know what's worse, the aliens trying to kill us or this damn humidity." "Focus," Roy snapped, his voice sharper than intended. Connor raised his hands in mock surrender. "Yes, sir." Chris straightened suddenly, his expression grim. "Got it. But once this door opens, we're going to have company. Lots of it." Roy nodded, his jaw tightening. "We'll deal with it. Everyone ready." Connor checked his weapon, and Chris gave a firm nod. Together, they braced for what lay ahead. The doors slid open with a groan, revealing a cavernous chamber bathed in an otherworldly green light. At its center sat Zareth Vale, the alien king, on a throne that seemed to grow from the floor itself. His massive, chitinous form radiated power, his glowing eyes fixed on the intruders with a mix of disdain and amusement. "So," Zareth said, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very air. "The insects have come to die." Roy stepped forward, his rifle aimed squarely at the king. "Not today. You're coming with us." Zareth laughed, a sound that chilled Roy to his core. "You dare presume to command me? You are nothing. Your species is nothing. I have crushed entire civilizations beneath my feet. We'll see how untouchable you are when the galaxy sees you dragged through the mud," Roy said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his gut. Zareth rose from his throne, his towering form casting a shadow over the team. He moved with a deliberate, almost languid grace, as though he considered them unworthy of his full attention. Connor muttered under his breath, "Well, he's not compensating for anything, that's for sure." The king raised an arm, and the walls of the chamber shifted. Alien guards poured in, their weapons aimed and ready. Roy didn't hesitate. "Chris, suppressive fire. Connor, get the nets." The room erupted into chaos. Chris fired a barrage of shots, driving back the first wave of guards, while Connor sprinted toward the throne, a device clutched in his hands. The net was human ingenuity at its finest, an electromagnetic containment field designed specifically to neutralize Zareth Vale's defenses. The king snarled, his glowing eyes narrowing. With a flick of his wrist, he sent a wave of energy surging toward Connor. The pilot barely dodged, rolling to the side as the energy scorched the ground where he'd stood. "Little help here," Connor shouted, his voice strained. Roy fired at the king, aiming for his exposed joints. The shots didn't penetrate the armor like chitin, but distracted Zareth long enough for Chris to take out another guard. "Connor now!" Roy yelled. Connor activated the net, throwing it with a precision that belied his earlier panic. The device expanded midair, its energy tendrils wrapping around Zareth Vale. The king roared, his movements slowing as the containment field disrupted his power. "You think this will hold me?" Zareth bellowed, his voice shaking the chamber. "It doesn't have to," Roy said, stepping closer. "It just has to slow you down." Chris took down the last of the guards, his breathing heavy. "We're clear, barely." Connor grinned despite himself. "I can't believe that worked." Roy didn't share his relief. Zareth was still struggling against the net, and they didn't have much time before reinforcements arrived. "Connor, get the transport ready," Roy ordered. "Chris, help me with the king." Together, they dragged Zareth Vale toward the exit, the king snarling and thrashing against the containment field. The fortress trembled with distant explosions. Connor had set charges to cover their retreat, and the walls were beginning to buckle under the strain. "You will regret this," Zareth growled, his voice filled with venom. "The galaxy will burn for your insolence." Roy leaned in close, his expression cold. "Maybe, but not before they see you like this." The team reached the extraction point where the Valkyrie waited, engines roaring. Connor stood at the ramp, waving them in. "Let's go," he shouted. Roy and Chris hauled Zareth onto the ship, securing him in a containment unit designed for just this purpose. The king glared at them, his glowing eyes promising vengeance. Connor launched the Valkyrie into the sky, dodging enemy fire as they escaped the collapsing fortress. Roy sank into a seat, exhaustion washing over him. Chris slumped beside him, his voice quiet. "We actually did it." Roy nodded, his gaze fixed on the containment unit. Zareth Vale was theirs, but the hardest part was yet to come. As the ship hurtled through space, Roy's thoughts turned to what lay ahead. Dragging the alien king before the Galactic Council would be a gamble, but it was their best shot at turning the tide. "Buckle up," Connor called from the cockpit. "This ride's only getting bumpier." Roy closed his eyes, steeling himself. The war was far from over, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. The Galactic Council chamber was a place of austere magnificence. Towering spires of crystalline architecture loomed above the assembled representatives of countless species, their forms as diverse as the stars themselves. The air was thick with tension, a palpable energy that mirrored the anticipation of every being present. This was not merely a council meeting. It was a reckoning. Roy Everett stood at the forefront of the human delegation, his body tense but his gaze unwavering. Beside him, Chris Cole maintained a steely composure, his tactical mind always running calculations, while Connor Maddox, uncharacteristically silent, watched the scene with a mix of awe and unease. Behind them, the containment unit holding Zareth Vale hovered on an anti-grav platform, its pulsating energy field casting eerie shadows across the chamber. The room fell silent as the Council's High Arbiter, a towering figure with a serpentine form and a voice like crushed glass, addressed them. "Humans, you stand before this Council with a claim that could alter the course of galactic history. Present your evidence." Roy stepped forward, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Council members, we bring before you Zareth Vale, the self-proclaimed king of the outer reaches. For too long, his empire has waged war, subjugating entire species and annihilating those who resist. Today, we present him as proof that even the mightiest tyrant can be brought to justice." A murmur rippled through the chamber, disbelief mingling with grudging respect. The sight of Zareth, bound and stripped of his regal dominance, was a spectacle none had anticipated. Even restrained, his presence was formidable. His glowing eyes scanned the room with cold fury, and his voice, when it came, was a low, resonant growl that silenced the murmurs. "You dare to parade me like a trophy before this assembly? You think this changes anything? Your insolence will be the undoing of your kind. The High Arbiter regarded Zareth with a calculating gaze. Zareth Vale, the Council has long been aware of your endeavors, yet no one has dared to challenge your dominion so directly until now. What do you have to say in your defense? Zareth sneered, his chitinous armor shifting as he strained against the containment field. I need no defense. The strong rule, and the weak serve or perish. This is the natural order of the galaxy. These humans disrupt that order with their foolish notions of equality and justice. Roy's voice cut through the silence. Natural order? Is that what you call the slaughter of innocents? The destruction of civilizations? You're nothing more than a tyrant, and today, the galaxy sees you for what you are. The tension in the room was electric. Representatives leaned forward, their expressions ranging from skepticism to cautious hope. Roy knew that words alone wouldn't sway them. He turned to Chris, who activated a holographic display. The chamber was filled with images and recordings. Worlds reduced to ashes, survivors recounting their torment, and fleets obliterated by Zareth's forces. The evidence was irrefutable. This is a legacy of Zareth Vale, Roy said, his voice rising. But it doesn't have to continue. The galaxy has a chance to unite against this darkness, to stand together and say, enough. The High Arbiter's gaze swept the room. The evidence is compelling, but this council is not easily swayed. Zareth Vale's forces are vast, his influence deep. Even now, his fleets amass at the edges of our territories. Humanity's boldness is admirable. But what assurance do we have that this act will not provoke greater conflict? Before Roy could respond, Zareth let out a guttural laugh. Assurance? There is none. My fleets will descend upon your worlds like fire from the heavens. You think capture me changes anything? My empire is eternal. Roy stepped closer to the containment unit, his eyes blazing. You're wrong. Empires fall when people refuse to bow. Your name will become a warning, not a legacy. The chamber doors burst open and a figure stumbled in. A young human officer, her uniform scorched and bloodied. Commander Everett, she gasped, her voice urgent. Zareth's forces, they're here. They've breached the sector. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The High Arbiter turned to Roy, her voice sharp. Is this your plan, human? To drag the Council into your war? No, Roy said, his voice firm. But the war is here, whether we fight it together or alone. Zareth's eyes gleamed with malevolent triumph. You see? Even now, my forces come to reclaim me. You are powerless to stop what is inevitable. Chris's voice broke through the calms, calm but urgent. Roy, we're detecting massive energy signatures. If those fleets aren't stopped, they'll level this entire sector. Roy's mind raced. The situation was spiraling, but retreat wasn't an option. He turned to the Council. This is your chance to prove that the galaxy stands for more than fear. If we fight together, we can stop Zareth's forces. But if we falter now, we lose everything. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the High Arbiter spoke, her voice resonating with authority. The Council will not stand idly by. Representatives, mobilize your fleets. Today, we face this threat as one. A roar of approval swept through the chamber. Roy turned to his team, a fire igniting in his chest. Connor, get the Valkyrie prepped. Chris, coordinate with the Council's forces. We're taking this fight to Zareth's fleet. The next hours were a blur of activity. The Council's armada assembled, a coalition of ships from every corner of the galaxy. Roy and his team boarded the Valkyrie, their resolve steeled by the weight of what was at stake. As the fleets converged, the battle began. The void of space erupted in fire and light, the clash of technologies creating a symphony of destruction. Roy guided the Valkyrie through the chaos, his team working seamlessly to outmaneuver the enemy. Amid the fray, Zareth's flagship loomed, a monstrous vessel bristling with weaponry. Roy's voice was steady as he addressed his team. That's our target. If we take out Zaratha's command ship, the rest will fall into disarray. The Valkyrie weaved through the battlefield, dodging enemy fire as it closed in on the flagship. Chris worked furiously at the tactical station, finding a weakness in the ship's defenses. "There," Chris said, highlighting a vulnerable section of the hull. "We'll need to get in close." Connor grinned. "Close is my specialty." As the Valkyrie approached, Roy felt the weight of the moment settle over him. This was it, the culmination of everything they'd fought for. The ship shook under the impact of enemy fire, but Connor held steady, bringing them within striking range. "Fire everything we've got," Roy ordered. The Valkyrie unleashed its payload, a torrent of missiles and energy blasts, striking the flagship's weak point. The ship shuddered, its hull fracturing as explosions ripped through its core. As the flagship disintegrated, the remaining enemy forces faltered, their coordination collapsing. The Council's fleets pressed the advantage, driving Zaratha's forces into retreat. In the aftermath, Roy stood on the Valkyrie's bridge, watching as the Council's ships secured the sector. The war wasn't over, but they'd struck a blow that would resonate across the galaxy. Chris joined him, his voice quiet. "We did it." Roy nodded, a rare smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Yeah, we did." For the first time in a long time, hope flickered on the horizon. The galaxy had taken a stand, and though the road ahead would be hard, they would walk it together.